Hello again, my little conscripts, and welcome to another Mordian Glory video. Today's episode will be another tournament after action report. That's right, it's time for some more dispatches from the front lines. But I've got something a little bit different for your viewing pleasure today. I went to my first ever Bolt Action 3rd edition tournament. And let me tell you, it was an absolute blast. There were incredible heights. There were terrible lows. We had Matilda 2s facing off against Tiger tanks. And we had Stuarts battling it out with Panzer 3s. And so without further ado, I can't wait any longer, guys. I'm just too excited. I've got to get into this. Let's fix bayonets and charge right into today's episode. Achtung, conscripts! Warlord Games is now an official sponsor of the Mordian Glory channel. And not only that, they have given me an affiliate link which I have popped down in the description below. By using that link, you can get your hands on some awesome World War II bolt action miniatures and at the same time support the Mordian Glory channel.
Bring it to me, figure Figure Figure.
You have all of my ideas, so what are you waiting for? Do the right thing and buy yourself some bolt action today. As is tradition, I want to start off with a few thank yous. First up, I want to say a big thank you to Greg and Phil, who were the tournament organizers for the event. Greg and Phil actually have their own YouTube channel. It's called The Dice Ghost. I'll make sure there's a link down in the description below. And this was their first event that they were running, and it was really, really well done. To be honest, I couldn't really tell it was the first time they had run an event, and they had clearly done the homework and put a lot of effort into making sure that the event went smoothly. Round timings were on point, everyone got paired up quickly and efficiently, and there was even a cheeky bit of prize support as well. What more can you ask of a tournament? Me personally, I will be going to any new Dice Ghost tournaments they decide to put on, and if you guys get an opportunity to go to them, I highly recommend that you do so. I also want to do a big shout out to the Merseyside Bolt Action group, who actually not only turned up to the tournament, but also provided a lot of terrain for it. So as we're going through these games and you see the beautiful boards that we got to play on, that is all thanks to them. So big shout out to those guys too. Also, big thank you and shout out to Just Play, which was the store where the event was hosted. Just Play is a great local gaming establishment, and if you've watched any of my tournament reports, you'll know that I really enjoy all of the events that they either host or run themselves. And last but certainly not least, I want to say a big thank you to all of my opponents, because I had 3 truly fun games. But with all of that said, now let's get into the video proper, and let's begin with a list overview. As per usual, I have made a separate video going through the nitty-gritty of my army list, and I'll make sure there's a link to that down in the description, but I'll give you guys a quick summary now. I decided to bring a somewhat fluffy and themed mid-war British army, the Desert Rats. Now, I did this for a couple of reasons. Firstly, I really like the Matilda tank, and I wanted a good excuse to put a couple into my army. And secondly, this event was billed as more of a let's learn 3rd edition together. Winning and losing isn't as important. It's more about us just launch the edition with a bang. And so I didn't want to come down with something absolutely cutthroat. And if I'm going to be totally honest, I don't even think I could run an absolutely cutthroat bolt action list even if I wanted to. I've always just collected it with the cool units and what's caught my eye. And so I basically just brought an army that I was really enthusiastic about. Was a starter army with a couple of tanks thrown into it. In the list specifically, we were running the British with the rapid fire national characteristic. I had a rifle platoon with a platoon commander, 3 10-man squads with all rifles, and then I also had an anti-tank rifle, and I had an artillery observer and a light mortar. I then had a second platoon, which was a heavy weapons platoon with a platoon commander, a mortar, and a medium machine gun. And then I had a third platoon, which was my artillery platoon with a regular platoon commander. And then I had a medium anti-tank gun and a 25-pounder, so that's the light howitzer, which has been upgraded with the gun shield and the 25-pounder light AT shells. And then in the last platoon, I had a Matilda 2 CS command tank. Then I had a regular Matilda 2. Then I had a Stuart 1, which is the Stuart with the 2 hull-mounted medium machine guns, and then the coax medium machine gun and the light anti-tank gun. And then I had a long-range desert group Chevy truck, which is basically a soft-skin vehicle with 2 MMGs. Every single model in the army was regular veterancy, just to keep it nice and simple, and it came to 1,245 points, and there were 17 order dice. Now let's take a look at the lay of the land. What was this event all about? Fundamentally, it was a RTT, a 1-day, 3-round tournament. It was 1250 point limit, and there was no limit on dice or platoons, with the TO saying, look, it's the first event, let's just raw dog this thing and see how it works. Interestingly, if you'd done that in 2nd edition, it would have been madness and the tournament would have just been chaos. But in 3rd edition, I noticed that pretty much everyone was running between 16 and 20 dice, and people weren't really going absolutely nuts with 30 plus dice or anything like that. Maybe it was just because it was a softer event, with the whole thing being more of a launch party than a cutthroat tournament, but there were still some players that were there to win it and had brought some pretty hard lists, and even they didn't have a ridiculous dice disparity over their opponents. I only mention this because there has been some chit and, dare I say, chat around the proverbial internet water coolers about how 3rd edition can have crazy numbers of order dice, but I did not see that in this tournament. But speaking of players and opponents, I was looking around the game hall and I saw a real nice mix of people and skill levels at this event. You had some people who were just coming along and just playing a few games and just learning the new edition, and then you had a few people that were there to win the event, to do as well as possible, but the majority of people were kind of just in the middle. They'd played a few games of Action before, maybe they've even been to a few 2nd edition tournaments, but they had turned up with what they thought was a pretty decent list. They'd done their best at making a good 3rd edition list, but mostly they were just there to play a few games, roll a few dice, and just enjoy going to a bolt action event. Overall, I would describe this whole thing as semi-competitive. As for the terrain at the event, by and large, it was not only beautiful, stunning, some of the best boards that I've played on at a competitive event, but in terms of its balance, it was pretty good. It was definitely a bit more themed and a bit more about the vibe and the aesthetics than it was about game balance, but apart from in one game, I never felt like I was being disadvantaged or overly advantaged due to the terrain. So it was a really good mix of both flavor and functionality. But that's enough pre-game preamble if you will. I know why you guys are really here. Let's get into the real meat of the video and let's take a look at the games. Game number 1 was kill points, where you get 1 point for each enemy unit that you wipe out, and I was playing against Martin and his US Marines. Get some devil dogs! In his list, Martin had double rifle platoon, and he also had a heavy weapons platoon as well. In the rifle platoons, he had 6 squads of US Marines, all of them 10-man strong, and nearly every single squad had 1 BAR, although I think there might have been 1 or 2 that didn't. He had a few lone officers running around for those platoons, and he also had a couple of bazooka teams in jeeps, and then there were 2 MMG teams, and there were also 2 mortar teams as well. In total, Martin's list came to about 18 or 19 dice, giving him a slight dice advantage over mine. The board we were playing on was a Pacific theme board, perfect for the US Marines, although I'm not quite sure how my desert rats got there. And for the terrain, we basically said that everything was either soft cover or dense. So all of the forested areas that you see are going to count as dense terrain. So you get a 5-up cover save for being in the terrain, but you can't see through the terrain. And when you see things like the rice field, and you've also got the rocky outcrops in the middle, that kind of stuff was just soft cover if you're in it or shooting over it. And for the buildings, because they were not hardened concrete structures, because they were wooden things, we said that they were buildings, so you could get in them, and we treat them as buildings for embarking and disembarking, as it were, but that they would only give you the benefit of soft cover. Now, deployment in this mission was standard. There was a 12-inch deployment zone on either side. We were on the long table edges, and we took it in turns to deploy our units by pulling dice out of the bag. Once all of the units had been deployed, I had ended up with a very heavy concentration of forces on the left and in the middle, with my 3 infantry squads up front, essentially screening my army. They're the bigger units, they're a bit chunkier, they could take a bit more damage. And then behind that, I had all of my officers and my support teams, as well as having a pair of Matildas anchoring my middle, able to go left or go right and respond to where the enemy threats might emerge. I did have a flanking force on the extreme right of my deployment zone, which was my long-range desert group truck and my Stuart. I put those guys over there because my deployment zone was getting quite crowded, and I wanted to have some fast movers that could sweep down the flank and hoover up some of the isolated weapon teams and officers. As for the American deployment, on the left flank, they had 3 rifle squads and the 2 bazooka jeeps. And then in the middle, they had another 3 rifle squads and the 2 MMG teams. And then over on the right flank, they had both of their medium mortars. With everything deployed, it was time for turn 1. And of course, with this being bolt action, it wasn't a roll-off to see who goes first. We just poured all of our order dice into the bag and we started pulling dice out. Now, because of this, rather than going through which dice were pulled out in which order, which could get a little bit confusing and messing, say Marine Squad 1 is here, Marine Squad 3 is here, and all that kind of stuff, what I decided to do is break this down by flank. So what happened turn 1 on the left flank, in the middle, and on the right flank. Hopefully, this will make the games a little bit easier to follow, but let me know what you think about this format down in the comment section below. It's been a little while since I've done a bolt action tournament report, so I'm open to all feedback and suggestions. With that said, turn 1 on the left flank was pretty quiet. The British forces did not advance. I was adopting a defensive position because I knew I had the range advantage over the Americans. And so most of my guys just stayed still. As for the Americans on the left flank, they began pushing forward with 3 of their Marine squads, and they also had one of the bazooka jeeps ensconce itself behind some of the dense terrain on that side as well. Where things were hotting up though, turn 1 was in the middle. The Americans pushed forward with a couple of machine gun teams, and they also started moving down the middle with a few more of their big 10-man squads as well. Now, they put a lot of firepower into one of my rifle squads, the one in the rice field, but I went down, I had a 3-up cover save, and I was able to weather any casualties and just get a couple of pins for my trouble. But there was one very exciting moment when one of the bazooka jeeps drove forward, the bazooka team got out, and even though I'd had a machine gun on ambush, and I managed to get a hit, I didn't get any kills, and then the bazooka, even though it needed 6s to hit me because of advance and then a pin, still got the hit on my command Matilda, and got a penetrating hit as well, but fortunately for me, they only caused some engine damage. That did mean my Matilda had a mighty 3-inch move because it's a slow vehicle already, but it could have been a lot worse. Unfortunately for me, that American bazooka ambush had been one of the last dice of the turn, and in fact, the only thing that I'd had a chance to shoot at them with is my ambush machine gun, and then I had one more dice, which was my light mortar, which unfortunately missed. But it wasn't all the Americans' way in the middle. Between my medium mortar, my 25-pounder, and my Matilda CS, I was actually able to flatten one of the medium machine gun teams. I was fishing for that lucky first turn 6. I got it, and I was able to get the kill and get an early dice out of the bag for the Americans. As for the right flank, I advanced with both vehicles and just sprayed a few shots into targets of opportunity, but didn't really cause any major casualties this turn. I'm really lining up for turn 2 when I can zoom down that flank and start picking off some of those medium mortars that are hanging around on that side of the board. With turn 1 completed, we put the order dice back into the dice bag and we go straight into turn 2. On the left flank, the Americans start pushing me really hard. The first 10-man Marine squad makes it into the mid-board forest and hoses down my British rifle section. Now, foolishly, I decided not to go down. I figured the Americans are going to be hitting On 5s, they're going to have like 14 shots. That should be like 5 hits. That should be 2 or 3 wounds. I'll have a 5-up save, probably save 1. I should take maybe 1 or 2 casualties. I ended up losing half of my squad due to some ferocious American firepower. In hindsight, that was a big mistake. The whole point of that unit was to just screen and to take as much damage as possible, to draw as much fire as possible, and by not going down with them, I basically made that mission a lot harder for that unit. And remember, behind this first American squad, there are 2 more on this flank. Overwhelming numbers of US infantry. And in the middle, things were even hotter. We started off the turn with the British bombardment successfully coming in. I did manage to roll a 4+, and I rolled a 6 against the bazooka team that had previously taken a pop at my Matilda, utterly flattening it. And then I also did a whole bunch of pins to the MMG team and also the infantry squads that were around the strike point as well. But just because one bazooka team was down did not mean I was out of the woods. At the end of the turn, in a repeat of turn 1, the second bazooka jeep came darting forward. It disembarked its bazooka team and they fired at my Matilda CS, but they did miss. This was going to be really important for turn 3, because if I can get the first dice, I can hit that bazooka team before it gets a chance to get off another shot. My Matilda CS is drawing a lot of fire, but there's only so long its luck can hold out. And on the right side of the board, Operation Flanky Boy was continuing as per plan. And my Long Range Desert Group truck and my Stuart drove forward. They managed to get a bead onto the medium mortar that was hiding behind one of the forests, and I was able to gun it down through the judicious use of medium machine gun fire. That got me another point in the bank. With all of that said, we got those dice back into the bag and we are on turn number 3. Now at this point, I was actually 2 to 3 dice up. I'd been able to kill the American bazooka team. I had been able to kill one of the American MMG teams. I had killed one of the American medium mortar teams. And I think at some point I'd picked up one of the lone American officers as well. So I was on about 4 kills and the Americans didn't have any. But all of that was about to change with turn 3. Despite the fact that I had the order dice advantage, the Americans were able to get the first order dice, and without hesitation, the bazooka team fired into my Matilda CS and they popped it, putting that bazooka round right through the front armor and destroying the vehicle. Furthermore, on the left flank, the American infantry push continues with the 3 units of Marines bearing down on my beleaguered British forces, and they're able to wipe out the remainder of the infantry squad that had been on that side, as well as doing some damage and pins to the medium machine gun team as well. The left flank and the middle were looking very strong for the Americans, and it was only the flanky boy force on the right that was really keeping the Brits in the game. I was able to destroy another one of the medium mortars using the long range desert group truck and firing at the mortar that was hiding behind the big building in the Marine deployment zone, and I also was able to pick up another lone officer with my Stuart. With the lines beginning to clash and American infantry pouring over the British front, we get to turn 4. By the end of the turn, on the left flank, the Americans were dominating the British, destroying the medium machine gun team and starting to lay fire onto a medium anti-tank gun that I had ensconced in the bottom left-hand corner. In the middle, I had my 10-man infantry squad that had just gone down the entire game and just stayed down to just keep removing those pins. They had started to take quite a few casualties, being reduced by 40%. And then the only thing that was really keeping me going was over on the right flank. My long range desert group truck finished off the medium mortar. I think I killed it over the course of turn 3 and turn 4. And then my Stuart, between it and then my right hand side infantry squad and a few of the bits of supporting fire, was actually able to wipe out an entire American infantry squad. They had sprinted out into the open, maybe a little bit overconfidently, and we had been able to gun them down, really showing the importance of cover saves in this edition. As we enter turn 5, we realise there's only a few minutes left on the clock, so we do a lightning round and we have turn 5 as the last one of the game. The Americans on the left flank almost wipe out the medium anti-tank gun, but going down behind that gun shield means that I am able to keep that unit alive, denying the Americans a victory point. I continue to stay down in the middle with the infantry squad there, just relying on those 3-up saves, just having that power armor. And also on the right flank, I'm able to do a little bit of damage to one of the infantry squads of the Americans, just pouring it in from the rear. But no dice get taken out of the bag for either side. And at the end of the game, it ends up being about 7 or 8 kill points to the Brits, to about 2 or 3 to the Americans. And so I don't mean to alarm you, but we get to the end of my first bolt action 3rd edition competitive game, and I've only gone and done it. I've got a bloody win. I just want to say a huge thank you and shout out to Martin for an incredible game, and it was just a ton of fun. Very sporting and lots of epic highs and terrible lows on both sides. And I'll tell you what, I've had a sneaky suspicion about pure infantry American lists, and seeing one in action is terrifying. If I was to adapt Martin's list for my own use, I'd probably not worry about having those medium mortars or medium machine guns. They didn't really add much to his army. His whole thing is, pushing forward, speed, violence, momentum, fire, and maneuver. What I would probably do in his case is keep the bazookas. They were great. Maybe even add in another bazooka and then go for some light mortars instead, because those still provide you with HE. They still provide you with indirect fire, but they can keep up with the infantry squads, and they're a bit more mobile, and they're less susceptible to being flanked and being left behind. But hey, I'm not throwing any shade on Martin. Let's be clear. These are all just lessons learned, benefit of hindsight, all that good stuff. Martin played a great game, and like I said, it was a ton of fun. But with all that said, now let's get into game number 2. So after giving the Yanks a damn good thrashing in game 1, it was time to give Jerry 6 of the best trousers down in game number 2. In this game, I was playing against Greg and his Germans. Now, Greg was actually one of the TOs of the event, and he was running a pretty spicy German army. There was double Tiger 1. If you see the picture of the Tiger 2 in this game, it is actually being used as a Tiger 1. And then we had double Neb, which were both inexperienced, and then there was a Flak 88, which was being used to recrew the Nebs. Very, very clever. And then there was a half track, which was representing a heavy truck with a heavy autocannon on the back. There were 4 5-man squads, and then I think there was a couple of officers running around. In total, Greg had 12 order dice. Once again, we were playing on the long table edges. That's Dawn of War deployment, a few 40k players. And the mission was objectives. It was key positions. Now, we got 5 objectives, and how the tournament was running it is you roll off to see who picks which side, and that person also gets to place the first objective. Now, I immediately said to Greg, are you sure? Because whoever wins the roll-off is going to get, in our case, 3 objectives to place, and they'll know which side they're on, so they'll just place them on their side. And Greg went, yeah, don't worry about it. We're just trying this format out. It is our first tournament. We're trying a little bit of a twist on the usual key positions to see how it works. So immediately, we rolled the dice to see who would get first, who would get to pick first side. I won. I got 3 objectives, and I just put them all in my deployment zone behind heavy cover. But, at least we had talked out, and going forward, I do think that it should be that either the objectives are pre-placed, or that if you win the roll off the side, the opponent gets to place the objectives, or you have to roll off for size afterwards. Now, speaking of placing objectives and heavy cover and all that good stuff, as you can see, we were playing on a city board, and pretty much everything was heavy cover, was hard cover. So all of the buildings that are intact were buildings that you could go inside. So you've got the church, and then you've got a couple of the houses that are sort of scattered about, and then any building that wasn't fully intact counted as a ruin. Any of the hard barricades, like sandbags and stuff, they were also going to be hard cover. And any of the soft barricades, like the tank tracks and the barbed wire, were going to count as soft cover. The ruins, of course, are also dense. They do block line of sight. And the telegraph poles weren't doing anything. They were just there for aesthetic purposes. So if my last game was characterized by soft cover, this game was very much characterized by hard cover. With the sides picked and the objectives down, it was time to go into the first turn, and we were doing first wave for our deployment. That means nothing starts the game deployed, and the first turn is where you pull your dice out of the bag and you run or advance units onto the board. This is one of my favorite kinds of deployment because often you end up just deploying how you would normally, but there is the chance for a few pot shots to take place, and it does allow for a bit of active play and counterplay. And how our first turn played out is on the left flank, I had an infantry squad which ran onto the board. I had a medium mortar that moved onto the board. I had my Matilda CS which advanced onto the board, and then I had my long range desert group truck which ran all the way up the board as far as it could go because I was on the road, so I could double my movement even more, which was very, very good. In the middle, I ended up placing my light howitzer, my 25 pounder, and I had my medium anti-tank gun, and I had an infantry squad there, and I also had my Stuart. And then over on the right flank, I ended up with a Matilda, a medium machine gun team, and an infantry squad, an anti-tank rifle, and my light mortar. And I also had an officer and my forward observer. As for the Germans, they ended up bringing both of the Tiger tanks on the right flank. So my poor little Matilda 2 with its light anti-tank gun was facing down double Tiger. It was not long for this Earth, guys. And I knew what Greg's plan was going to be. He was going to push those tanks down that flank, sweep aside any anti-tank that he came across, and basically get onto the objectives with those tanks, contesting them. And then if he can do that, he's guaranteed a draw, and he might even be able to start getting a win as well if he can contest another one of my objectives. In the middle, the Germans deployed both Nebs, and they also had the Flak 88, and they had the 4 infantry squads essentially covering the middle and the right-hand side. The Germans basically had nothing over on the left-hand flank. They did have an officer who ran onto the board into the church, but he didn't stay in that church for very long. In terms of any highlights from turn 1, my Matilda was able to dodge both of the Tiger shots because my Matilda came on first and then the Tigers came on after. And my medium machine gun team was able to pass all of its saves from the Tiger machine guns. And the only other thing of note, like I said, is that desert truck just zooming down the left flank. And my Matilda CS was able to try and dial in onto one of the Nebelwerfers, and then the German autocannon truck came on and it put a couple of shots into my Matilda CS, and I managed to tank them. And then my Stuart came on and gunned down the German flak truck with just firing 9 machine gun shots into it. I know the turn 1 summary was a little messy there, guys, between the units coming on in first wave and a few highlights, but hopefully all of that made sense. But we'll now continue with the same format as game 1, where we talk about what happens on the left flank, the middle, and the right flank. Turn 2 starts off with the Germans firing one of the Nebelwerfers at one of the buildings on that flank, and if you target the building, it starts hitting all of the units around the building, and they were able to actually get a hit on my officer that was hiding down there, and they killed him and the medium mortar that was nearby to him as well, taking 2 order dice out of the bank for the British straight away. As for the Brits on that flank, my Matilda CS ended up going for a rally to clear a couple of pins, and then my infantry squad pushes forward trying to get away from the building that's being targeted, and my long-range desert group truck zooms up and takes cover behind the church. In the middle, my Stuart moved forward and was able to get a bit of line of sight, gunning down one of the officers. It was actually the one that the Germans had moved from the church over to try and support the Nebelwerfers for the next turn for their bombardments. And as he ran across the gap between the 2 ruins, I was able to gun him down. Also in the middle, the other Nebelwerfer targeted my infantry squad that was near the medium anti-tank gun and the 25 pounder and was able to get a hit, but I went down against it, so I only lost 2 guys, and I did take a whole bunch of pins from that. And on the right flank, My Matilda 2 was utterly obliterated by one of the Tigers. It got a hit on a 6, it got like a pen on a 6, which was like a double pen, and then both results on the pen table were vehicle destroyed. There was just nothing left of that thing. The round went through the front and out of the back. But the good news is that my medium machine gun team just continued to stoically refuse to go down and just kept passing its 4-up cover saves. But it wasn't all going the Germans' way. Like I said, in the middle, I had gunned down that officer, but also on the right-hand flank, I was able to get a cheeky side shot with my medium anti-tank gun on the Tiger that was pushing forward, and I also managed to get a pin on it with an advancing anti-tank rifle. Putting 2 pins on that Tiger meant that there's a good chance it would fail its order test, and even if it didn't fail its order test, even if it passes it, it's still going to have 1 pin on it, affecting its to-hit ability. However, if turn 2 was the ascendancy of the Germans, turn 3 was time for the British Empire to strike back. On the left flank, my infantry continued to push forward, advancing and trying to get some pot shots onto any German units they could see, but most importantly, getting over 6 inches away from any buildings that might start procking neb hits onto them. I also had my long-range desert group truck move around the side of the church and start spraying down the neb, and I was able to kill one of the crew and put a pin on it. And then my Matilda CS that was on that flank was continuing to lob drop shots into the Nebelwerfer, and we hadn't quite got a hit yet. This is the second neb, but we were now dialing in on a 4. In the middle, my infantry squad had stayed down, which meant they got rid of all of those pins, and my 25 pounder had been also lobbing drop shots into that second neb, and that also was dialing in on a 4. No hit yet, but the moment I get that hit, it's going to be bad times for that inexperienced neb. But the right flank, oh boy, the right flank, that is where the action was. One of the first dice of the turn was my medium anti-tank gun going for a fire order on the Tiger, the King Tiger, that's really a Tiger 1, that was pushing forward. I get the 3 to hit. I then get a 6 to damage. Now, because even though I'm over half range, it's side armor, that means that I am in total pen plus 5. So rolling a 6 means I get a penetrating hit. My opponent rolls his cover save, which is a 4+, and rolls a 3. I go to roll the damage, and I roll a 6, blowing the Tiger up, destroying it, and saving the right flank. And to really rub salt in the wound, one of the German squads that have been pushing forward alongside that Tiger gets mown down by my medium machine gun, taking a few casualties and essentially getting made combat ineffective. That's one of the problems with running 5-man squads. The moment you take a few casualties, they just start lacking any real punch. You might be thinking, Mordian, this whole turn 3 sounds like only the Brits were doing stuff. And truthfully, that was the case. The German Nebs both failed their order tests and just ended up going down. And then the Flak 88 missed its shot, and it was only the Tiger coming over and laying down machine gun fire into my medium anti-tank gun that really did anything. And they did that after that medium AT had already fired its shot and got that Tiger kill. But with the dice back into the bag, we go into turn 4. Over on the left flank, I slightly repositioned my Chevy truck and I gunned down a couple of the crew from the Nebelwerfer, leaving just 1 left. I also run forward with my infantry squad, and they're sort of going from the left towards the more middle of the board now, sprinting down the main street. I also use my Matilda CS to do a drop shot onto the other neb, and I am able to get the hit, perfectly dialing in and flattening the crew. This forces the dice out of the bag and it has a down next to that neb because, of course, the Flak 88 could try and recrew it. In the middle, the Germans try and pop my Stuart, which I had pushed forward very aggressively last turn. They missed the shot with the Tiger because it was on an advance, so it's hitting on a 5. And then my Stuart went and gunned down the remaining Neb crew, the one that had also been targeted by the Chevy truck, meaning that this turn, both Nebelwerfers were taken out of the fight. Over on the right flank, things have really calmed down. With that tiger now destroyed and only 3 infantry hanging around the area, there isn't much going on. So I start pushing forward with my units on the right flank because I want to try and keep the Germans under pressure. I don't want them to have a chance to regroup and maybe go after that objective of mine. At the end of turn 4, it's looking a bit spicy for the Germans. They're on the ropes. They're under pressure. But turn 5 seals their fate. And it all comes down to the British bombardment. It had been delayed turn after turn, but it finally came in. And I got a big 6 to see how large it was going to be. And then I started rolling for each affected unit, and I just kept rolling 6 after 6 after 6. Firstly, a 5-man German squad was just flattened. Secondly, a Neb that had been recruited at the end of the last turn was destroyed. Thirdly, the Flak 88 was wiped out completely, and then every other unit basically took 2 or 3 pins. After that bombardment was done, the Germans had 1 Neb, 2 5-man squads, which didn't even have 5 people left in them anymore, a Tiger, and an officer. that was it. That was it, guys. Just a truly unholy bombardment, the wrath of God coming down on those Germans. And so over the course of turn 5 and turn 6, the Germans do try a desperate push, and they are actually able to contest one of the British objectives by essentially tank shocking the way to it with the Tiger. But once all is said and done, the final count on the objectives is 3 to the British because we take one of the German ones, 1 to the Germans because they just got a little squad hiding on it at the back of the board, and then 1 objective which is contested, leading to a significant British victory. I have to say, this game was such a roller coaster. When I saw those 2 Tigers come down, I thought that was it. Game over, man, before it's even started. And also facing double Neb was really, really intimidating. But what I kind of learned from this is that double Tiger is good, but it's very, very expensive. And the moment that one of them goes, it still takes the wind out of your sails. It's kind of like taking a Tiger in 2nd edition. When you lost it, it was a crushing blow. It's still the case in 3rd edition. I think double Panther is as big as I would go with the Germans. And honestly, I'm really thinking about double Panzer IV because you still have a pretty big gun and you're still a medium tank. But double Panther looks spicy. Regarding the Nebs, they are really, really powerful. But the fact that they pin themselves up does create a few problems with them. And yes, you can have officers nearby. But I think you're better off taking your Nebs a little bit more durable. Either take them as Panzerwerfers or take them as regular and try and ensconce them in some heavy cover. But with 2 victories in the bag, we go to game number 3, and I'm on top table. I'm in a position to win the bloody thing. What is going on? I've turned up with my silly, balanced, mid-war themed starter army plus a couple of tanks force, and I've only managed to wangle my way onto the top table. But I ended up playing into a fantastic player and a good friend of mine, and someone who I have not played against bolt action before, but I've played many other games with, a man called JP. Now, JP was running the Germans and he was running his Desert Africa Corps. And what I loved about his army is it wasn't cheesy. If we look at the first couple of lists I played, I wouldn't say they were cheesy, but they were definitely trying some cool new tricks, right? We had all infantry Americans, and then we had double Neb, double heavy tank Germans. But JP's army was just remarkably balanced. He had 2 Panzer IIIs with medium anti-tank guns. He had 2 Hanemags with a couple of squads inside, with SMGs, a couple of assault squads. He had a couple of regular infantry squads with LMGs. Had a couple of mortars, a couple of MMGs. We basically had the same amount of dice, and the only big difference between our lists is I had a few more sort of static teams, like with my medium AT and my light howitzer. And JP had a little bit more maneuverability because he had a recce platoon. Those Hanemags were actually recce Hanemags, which was really, really big because it means that you can actually, when you try and shoot them, they can recce away. And you can do that because any transport in the recce platoon can be upgraded to have recce for 10 points. The mission we were playing was Sectors Deployment, and it was a custom mission for the tournament where there were 5 objectives. Now, JP and I made a big mistake here, and truthfully, it did impact the game, because we thought that the TO had said they're pre-placed objectives, key positions, and you put them equally across the middle of the board. But what was actually meant to happen is each player was meant to have one objective in their deployment zone, and then the 3 objectives were meant to be deployed across the board. One in the middle, and then one basically in the middle of the other table quarters. Now, this made a huge difference because of where the positioning of the objectives were. It meant that and where the terrain was, you can see there's that big compound, it meant that one side could hold their objectives from hiding behind a wall, and the other side could not hold their objectives. So it was really, really important who won the roll-off to pick sectors, because if you won the roll-off, you were going to pick the side which had the objectives hiding behind the wall, the objectives all behind cover. And so unfortunately, I lost the roll-off, and JP instantly was like, I'm going to pick this side. And I was like, yeah, I don't blame you. Deployment was just regular deployment, no first wave. And there was a secondary part of the mission where you got a victory point for each unit that you wiped out. So even though the objectives weren't balanced and weren't in my favor, there was a chance that I could still win by just gunning things down. But that wasn't really going to be very possible because the Germans had more firepower than me. Their tanks have got bigger anti-tank guns than mine. Their tanks are faster than mine. My list was outclassed. My deployment was outclassed. Everything was outclassed. Guys, I think you can see where this game is going. But I will take you through what happened in the game. So with deployment, I had my Chevy truck on the left. In the middle, I had my Matilda 2 and my Stuart. I had an infantry squad and an officer there. At the back of my deployment zone, I had the medium anti-tank gun and the light howitzer and the medium mortar. Big mistake for my deployment here. I should definitely have had that medium anti-tank gun over on the right-hand side, but I was too focused on trying to cover the gap where those recce half-tracks were going to go. Really, I shouldn't have worried about those. I already had my tanks down over there. And then over on the right-hand side, I had my Matilda CS, and I had a couple of infantry squads and my machine gun. For the Germans, on the left, they had their recce platoon, and they also had the mortars and one of the Panzer IIIs. And then in the middle, they had 2 infantry squads and a medic. And then over on the right-hand side, they had double MMG team, an officer, and another Panzer III. With everything deployed, we get into turn 1. On the left flank, I moved my medium anti-tank gun over to the left a little bit more so I can cover that gap between the 2 ruins. And I actually stay still with my Stuart and my Matilda and my infantry squad just going down there because I didn't want to make the first push against those pretty scary medium anti-tank guns of the Panzer IIIs. In the middle, I push forward with my light howitzer. It's a 25-pounder, it's got a bit more anti-tank, and it's still got a gun shield. And I'm thinking to myself, you know what? If I can tempt one of those Panzer IIIs forward, I might be able to jump on it with my own tanks. As for the right-hand side, I push my infantry into the compound. I'm trying to make my way to those objectives. I'm thinking I'll try and dive on them at the end of the game. And my Matilda CS on the right-hand side ends up going for a drop shot on one of the machine gun teams, but unfortunately, I don't quite manage to get the hit. As for the Germans turn 1, they move their recce force forward on the left-hand side, getting from their deployment zone behind one of the ruins. They start trying to bombard me with their mortars, but they don't get any hits. They've got a spotter that's sort of hanging around, which I end up getting rid of. And unfortunately, they actually do manage to get my long-range desert truck. I had used my desert truck to push forward and get one of the spotters that the mortars were using to range in, and I thought I'd hidden myself behind one of the ruins, but that damn Panzer III was able to drive forward, get the shot, and even though it needed a 5 to hit, I'd already activated the unit so I couldn't recce, and they did manage to pop the truck, which was a big sad because I was hoping that was going to be doing lots of cool flanking maneuvers for me. In the middle, the Germans push forward with one of their LMG squads and the Panzer III. And it looks like a Panzer III command tank is going to go after my Matilda II command tank. And I do not feel very confident in my Matilda II because I've got a light howitzer and he's got a medium anti-tank gun. Going into turn number 2, the Germans run one of their squads out of the Hanemags on the left-hand flank and get it onto the far left objective. They also get one of their more long-range squads out of the other Hanemag, and they're actually able to pick off my officer, which was a little bit of a big sad. But on my left flank, I actually drive forward with both the Stuart and the Matilda, and I put 2 shots, and I also put a shot from the 25 pounder into one of the Panzer IIIs, but I'm not able to get any hits. Just miss, 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 which is a real shame because, yeah, it's light anti-tank and yeah, it's going to struggle to do much, but if I can start getting at least some hits on there, that would be nice. And who knows, cheeky light anti-tank gun has done me well before, but unfortunately, I just wasn't able to get those shots to connect. In return, both Panzer IIIs start bearing down on my units in the compound, one driving through the wall and starting to hose down my infantry with machine gun fire, and the other coming around the right-hand side and getting a miss on my Matilda II CS. Somehow, this Matilda II is just dodge, duck, dip, diving and dodging against those Kraut anti-tank rounds. Things go from bad to worse for the British, and by the end of turn 3, the Germans are actually controlling 4 out of 5 objectives. On the right flank, they've run a machine gun team over to hold that objective, and they've also pushed forward with their Panzer III, getting into point-blank range against the Matilda CS with a side shot. And JP rolls a 1 to hit. Yes, the Matilda CS. In return, the Matilda drives forward and gets a point-blank side shot on the Panzer III. I do manage to get a hit. I do manage to put a couple of pins on the Panzer III as well, meaning that next turn it's going to be even less happy about trying to shoot my Matilda. As for the middle, the Panzer III that's still in the compound is just hosing my infantry down there. I don't really have much that I can do about it. And as for the left-hand flank, the Germans used one of their assault squads, the one that had rushed onto the far left objective, to hose down one of my infantry squads out in the open. And I used my Matilda to hose down the sniper team that had been ensconced in the ruin. It was at this point that the TO came over and noticed our unusual objective placement and said to us, guys, you're not playing this right. And it was at this point that JP and I both went, oh my God, because if the objectives were placed how they were meant to, I'd be holding an objective. But most importantly, none of the objectives could be held from behind a wall, except for that sort of one that's near the middle of the board, near the compound. But they all would have been out in the open and it would have been anyone's game going for them. So we decide to play the game out. We're not going to reset anything at this point. We have a good joke. I do a bit of faux protesting. I've been bamboozled and all that kind of stuff. But we continue playing. And what happens in turn number 4 is on the right flank, the Panzer III, which has been trying to go after my Matilda CS the entire game, fails its order test and reverses backwards. It backs off in fear from the Queen of the Desert. I do follow up and try and shoot the Panzer III again, and I do manage to get a hit, and again I put a couple of pins on it. So even though my Matilda has not destroyed the Panzer III, I like to think that we did get the moral victory, because we did make a command Panzer III with medium anti-tank gun flee in terror before our might. As for the mid, knowing that turn 4 was probably going to be the last turn because of timings, and we might be able to talk out turn 5, I basically push all of my infantry onto the middle objectives, trying to contest them. And I do, likewise, I do the same thing with my Stuart, trying to contest the objective on the far left-hand flank. Casualties are fairly light for the British this turn. The Germans are basically just sort of bunkering down and hiding. I do take a few casualties here and there, but they're on most of the objectives and they're in a position to easily contest any that I try and hold. We get to turn 5 and there's only a few minutes left on the clock. JP and I, both being experienced tournament players, agree with sanction from the TO to just see where we think it would be at the end of turn 5. and we agree that JP would, we roll a few key dice out. JP is able to hold the far right objective. He is also able to hold one of the objectives in the middle, giving him 2 objectives. And I am able to contest 3 of the objectives, but I'm not able to actually hold any of them, meaning that JP does manage to win the game, 2 objectives to none, and also he was able to get 2 unit kills to my 1 unit kill. So I did get a victory point, so I wasn't completely whitewashed, but it was a well-earned victory to JP. And I do really want to emphasize that last point. It was a very well-earned victory by JP, because it would be easy for me to sit here and say, oh, I just lost because of the bad mission and getting the wrong sector. But truthfully, JP outplayed me. My deployment was shoddy. I was definitely taking it a bit too easy, considering it was just because it was the last game of the day. I should have been concentrating a bit more. And JP, I think, made better decisions than I did. I could sort of see the way the game was going, and I kind of gave up a little bit. Just sort of not gave up in like a negative way, just started having a bit of fun, doing a few crazy things. Your boldness is key, and sort of driving forward tanks and all that kind of stuff. But truthfully, I think JP kept his eye on the ball, and he already had the advantage. He kept the advantage. He out-deployed me, he outplayed me, and he definitely earned that victory. And so we get to the end of game number 3, the end of the tournament, and I have somehow managed to get 2 victories and 1 loss, and I end up coming 4th out of 12 players, narrowly missing out on the podium due to the fact that in that last game I didn't get many kill points, and that was the tiebreaker. Overall, I had a really, really fun event, enjoyed every single moment of it, and like I said at the beginning of the video, if any more Dice Ghost tournaments get run at Just Play or Element Games or anywhere in my local area, I definitely will be going to them. There are a few lessons learned that I would pick out from this. Firstly, the Matilda 2 very well may be the sexiest tank in the game, but it's pretty useless. My Matilda 2, my standard one with the light AT gun, I don't think killed a single thing the entire game. Maybe it killed like 1 infantry model, but it didn't do very much at all. But what I was really happy with was the Daka Stuart, the triple machine gun Daka Stuart, consistently ran around and picked up little units and was a nightmare for my opponents to deal with. It is light, it is vulnerable, but it is very cheap, and it does bring a very reliable amount of firepower to the tabletop. So the Daka Stuart lives on. It's nowhere near what it was in version 2, but it lives on a little bit. Another unit that I was very pleased with was the long-range desert truck. Nice soft-skin vehicle with a couple of MMGs. That was nice. What I was a little bit let down by was my indirect fire. Apart from when I was facing off against a bunch of static teams, they didn't really do all that much. And what I'm kind of feeling with my own 3rd edition list and how I might improve them is having a couple of medium mortars with a spotter or something. That's probably as much as I would go. Maybe a couple of light howitzers, but their minimum range is a bit of a problem. So having a couple of mortars is quite nice, but I feel like maneuver warfare, being a lot more mobile, is going to be much more important. But the number 1 takeaway for me was the fact that the army that felt the most powerful, the one that seemed to do the best, and the one that beat me, was that perfectly normal German army. A couple of Hanemags, a couple of tanks, a bunch of infantry, a couple of weapon teams. Just having a nice balanced army with lots of tools in the toolbox felt way more scary and dangerous than any SKU list. But it's very early days for the meta, so who knows how things will develop. And of course, all of this is just like my opinion, man. You guys let me know what you think down in the comment section. Are you excited for Bolt Action 3rd edition? Are you going to be going to any tournaments or playing any games with your friends? And let me know what army you want me to take to my next tournament, because I do have another one that's not that far away. If you enjoyed today's video, don't forget to smash that like button. And if you want to see more tournament after action reports, don't forget to subscribe to never miss an episode. Would you like to know more? If so, then please consider becoming a channel member or patron. By supporting the channel, not only will you be doing your part, but you'll also be helping me create more content for your viewing pleasure and unlocking a whole host of perks. You get everything from a badge next to your name, custom emojis, but the big one is access to the Mordian Glory Discord server, an online community with almost 2,500 active members. It's always popping off in the MG Discord. We've got channels for army lists, hobbying, tactics, stories, and even a pretty spicy meme section as well. For all you greenhorns that wanted to see the Mordian glory hole, today is your lucky day. And joking aside, I do want to say a massive thank you to all of the current channel members and patrons. You guys are amazing. Truly the lifeblood of the channel. I could not do Mordian Glory full-time without the incredible and generous support of my members. So thank you guys so much. And last but certainly not least, I want to say a personal thank you to all of my top tier Patreons. These are the War Masters, the people who have truly gone above and beyond the call of duty. So a heartfelt thank you to Alex Dengal, Bonbon Vert, Lord Pryor, Mark Panconi, RJ Scorpion, Swordfish Trombone, Try Again Bragg, John Stubbs, Nick Walsh, Diesel Fox, and August Barney. Seriously, guys, thank you from the bottom of my heart. Your support is incredible and it makes a huge difference. Thank you so much. That's all for now. Hope you've all enjoyed today's video. And of course, as always, I'll see you guys next time.